Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Blue Way series. Today, we're going to be talking about managing a nonprofit performing arts organization. I'm joined by Mike Scott and
Hey,
Genevieve
everybody.
Geisler. If you want to both introduce yourselves quickly.
Sure. I'm Mike Scott. I'm the CEO of the Bluecoats organization. My job is sort of to help manage the overall strategic vision of the organization and work with Genevieve to operate our wonderful programming.
And I'm Genevieve Geisler, and I'm the CFO and COO of Bluecoats. And Mike and I work together to run the entire organization as well as the drum corps.
And then, can you talk a little bit about your experience that kind of led you to where you are now?
Yeah, it's interesting. Genevieve and I have two very different sort of paths to the organization. I was a performer in the Bluecoats in 2011, so I started as a student and got that perspective. Got a degree in music education and started working for various drum corps and working in the classroom before I ended up back at Bluecoats doing some operations management and tour management. And then I did a little business development work at Bluecoats before I became the CEO in September of 2018.
Awesome.
And so my educational background has absolutely nothing to do with music or managing a performing arts organization. I have a BS in history and anthropology, and I have a master's degree in public health. So while I certainly have a wealth of knowledge about various topics, music was not one of them. But how I got introduced to the Bluecoats was actually through being a volunteer on the food truck back in the year 2000. So that's I didn't know anything. I wasn't even in marching band. I didn't know anything about. Drum corps, but I fell in love with the organization and the activity itself. Once I was exposed to it, so from there, I ended up getting a job with Bluecoats at a much lower level after a few years, and then over time, I was promoted into the role that I'm currently serving in. So it's been a very interesting career.
And I mean, who knew that your public health degree would come in such handy
Great
now?
point. So I'm perfectly poised to take on the pandemic
Yeah,
for the Bluecoats. So that actually has come in extremely handy in the last year, unfortunately.
yeah.
So
And I mean, going off of that a little bit, we had a lot of time with the season getting canceled to kind of refocus. And I know I've had a lot of conversations with both of you about, what happens when the drum corps kind of gets removed from the organization? What happens to the organization? What is the mission? What are we about? So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, the discussions that we had over the past year when the drum corps season was canceled.
Yeah, I think after we got over the initial hump of sort of crisis management, canceling the season, notifying everyone, really leaning heavily, like Jen mentioned, on her knowledge of public health. We got past all of that, and then
financial
yeah, and the
ramifications.
financial ramifications, of course. We got past all of that, and then we kind of had to ask ourselves the question of, okay, this is the reality for at least a year. What is the Bluecoats organization when there's no drum corps? For years, organizations like ours, the drum corps is the heart of your identity. You're a drum corps organization, and I think that for many years we've thought of ourselves like, okay, how do we continue to broaden? How do we continue to ensure that our mission is fulfilled for all types of students? That the drum corps isn't always all that we are, but instead it's sort of what we derive everything that's great about our organization. And with the drum corps gone, we had an opportunity really on our hands to ask ourselves, how does Bluecoats fulfill its mission without the drum corps? So we asked all sorts of questions about what we are educationally, philosophically, from a values standpoint. And then we just sort of began to answer those questions and really just kind of answer those questions in a way that made like what would make us proud, like what answer would make us proud. So we built new programs like Bluecoats School of the Arts, which brings all of our educational offerings online to students in a much more accessible way. We built programs like Learning Access, which take all the educational content that is on Bluecoats School of the Arts and brings it to local students in Canton completely for free. We talked about how to operate the drum corps virtually through Camp in the Cloud and other programming that brings all the students together from all over the world. And then we also talked a lot about our values and sort of how we could look at things that aren't programs at Bluecoats, but instead just look a little bit more fundamentally at how Bluecoats can answer to its own values and how it can make changes about our governance or changes about our approach to things that make us a better place as an organization.
In many ways, sort of a positive outcome of the pandemic in my eyes, especially as someone who's worked here for a really long time, is that, I think it finally completed our transition from, like most drum corps, we were a drum corps that became a nonprofit. and then we turned into a nonprofit that runs a drum corps.
Hmm.
And this really, kind of completed that transition into a drum corps that runs, or a nonprofit that runs a drum corps and a lot of other things. So I
Hmm.
think that, that was sort of a blessing in disguise of the pandemic, because it allowed us to take the time to work on some of the things that Mike is talking about. We've wanted to do some of those things forever. We've talked about them, we've had plans, but if you know anything about drum corps, it becomes all encompassing after a while, especially when you get into the competitive season. So, truly some things that we've been talking about for 5 and 10 and even 15 years were finally realized during the pandemic. And I think, you know, that has, been something that has really strengthened us as an organization, as a
Hmm.
nonprofit organization versus as a drum corps itself, which for which it was, it was definitely a negative, seeing as how you couldn't even put the drum corps out there. So
Right. Well, maybe we'll talk about this more in a second, but the Bluecoats organization has always traditionally run itself very lean. It's a very lean and mean type operational strategy. We have just a small handful of employees, and then we kind of build out with seasonal contractors and things in the summertime. But when the pandemic, we were even more lean and mean. So when you're that lean, and when you try to operate as much good and as much programming as you can with as few resources as possible, that does kind of mean what Genevieve was talking about, that the drum corps becomes all encompassing when the drum corps is out there, which is great because the Bluecoats Drum and Bugle Corps is incredible. It's a
yes.
wonderful program that brings so much joy into the world, and it's a wonderful thing for students that are in it. It's a wonderful thing for hundreds of thousands of people
And
that
it's fun for us,
watch
to
it
be
every year, and
honest.
it's fun for
So
us.
yeah.
But all those projects that are kind of put on the bookshelf, you're like, okay, one day we're going to have a better approach to diversity, equity, inclusion. One day we're going to have a better approach to scholarships. One day we're going to have a better approach to educational programming that isn't the drum corps. One day we're going to have a better approach to the boring stuff like bookkeeping and databasing and organizing all of your information and asset cataloging and all those things. And then it's like, okay, great, now let's take some of those things off the shelf. And I think we were able to do some of that boring stuff. We migrated all of our bookkeeping to the cloud,
Right.
and then we were able to do some of the more
Tell me more.
important yeah, exactly, some of the more important stuff like diversity, equity, inclusion.
Yeah, I'm definitely, I think, most proud of our work on all those things that have to do with our values, like you
Yeah.
mentioned. Those things that we, to be honest, to be perfectly honest, we should have taken the time to do before, no matter how busy we were
Yeah.
with the Drum and Bugle Corps. But the reality is, we didn't, and we did. And what we did do, though, is take the time now that we had it to focus on those things. And I think that a lasting legacy of this pandemic time will be that we are able to continue to incorporate things like our anti-racism policy, our diversity and inclusion advisory council, our scholarship offerings, et cetera, into our work as a nonprofit, but also, in the School of the Arts,
Hmm.
into our work as a nonprofit, but also back into the Bluecoats Drum and Bugle Corps itself
100%.
going forward, so that, the group itself, and the organization itself benefits from this pandemic time.
Hmm.
And I wonder, like, just in general, even outside of the pandemic, I wonder how these individual things, we're talking about it, the organization being more than just a drum corps, how these other like arms of Bluecoats organization, how that kind of strengthens the whole organization, why it's not just a drum corps,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there are so many things that make drum corps just fantastic. And for some reason, there's just a electricity to having a drum corps that just it's like a magnet, just brings so many people together. But when you bring all those people together and you kind of find that magic, all of these other programs that we're talking about building and that we're working on leverage those people. It leverages this incredible community that the drum corps creates. School of the Arts is a great example. We could have built the technology for School of the Arts easy. Any organization could have just put the time into, let's build a learning management system and create a brand and build a website and put it all up there. But it's the fact that when we run a live program through School of the Arts, or when we put coursework in School of the Arts, it's the most incredible educators ever, because we have access to that. There are people that work for the drum corps. There are people that make the drum corps the incredible thing that it is every year. And so we were able to say, hey, team, this has been tough. We canceled the drum corps. You all lost your jobs teaching a drum corps this summer. However, let's re-engage you and let's build something else. And as a result, we had thousands of students. I mean, several thousand students come through a live event on School of the Arts last winter. And we had some incredible guests. We brought Jacob Collier in, and we had, all these. Spot Seawright came and performed for our percussion section. I mean, incredible what we were able to do, but that was all amplified by the fact that the incredible talent that we have from the drum corps could go there. So, kind of, I think a part of our strategy has been, as we recreate or as we build an organization, like Genevieve said, a nonprofit that runs a drum corps. Sometimes I think of it kind of like the way that maybe a major national orchestra would think of it. Like, you have this incredible asset. You have the Los Angeles Philharmonic or the New York Philharmonic or the San Francisco Symphony. Now let's leverage all that magic and build other things like they would build a youth orchestra, or they would build online programming, or they would build, concerts for kids program. We can do those things, so
Yeah, so
that's the sky's the limit.
to your point there, to me, it is a mistake to not always remember that the drum corps is your premier program, sort of like the orchestra. They're not going to, or the Philharmonic, they're not going to move away from the idea that that's their core program and that's their shining star. But instead of thinking about how can we, just how can we diversify generally, instead thinking about leveraging,
Hmm.
the capital, the social
The
capital,
magic, yeah,
the magic that you have from that very, very special performing ensemble to do other good, I
yeah.
think is a really good way to think about it.
Yeah, and School of the Arts fits that strategy perfectly.
Totally.
And there's plenty of other. We've talked about. We have tons of kids and band directors that buy tickets to the Akron show, for instance, as a group. Like, there's ways for us to take those touch points to the drum corps that continue to provide more good. Or learning access is another great example.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about that with learning access a little bit because it really does that, like we talk about using our values and taking what we have and kind of opening that up to everybody. And that's really what learning access is doing. It's opening
Yeah.
up to a broader community that, would not have access to Bluecoats programming. And now we're saying, okay, great, everybody can have access to this for free.
Yeah.
Everyone in Canton, all the students in Canton through Canton City or Canton
Yeah,
School
Kansas City
Dis-
schools
Yeah.
and enrichment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's great that we can kind of use our assets and open that up also.
Yeah.
And
as part of
one
the
thing about that
values.
is not only using the financial assets that we have from the drum corps, it's also utilizing our teachers, the
Mhm.
assets that we have as educators and intellectual
Mhm.
assets, I guess you
Yeah.
could say, from the people, the really incredible cadre of professionals that we've developed as a part of the Bluecoats, and allowing them to you know kind of go out and into the world and spread their knowledge in a way that they might not otherwise do. We have people from all over, the United States and even other countries that
Right.
are part of our team. Students at Canton City Schools would never have access to them and their expertise if it weren't for the way that the Bluecoats Drum Corps, is kind of connecting them together.
Yeah. Well, and for those that might not be familiar, learning access also leverages a pandemic only
Yeah.
thing, and that's our move to technology. So
Mm.
learning access makes all of Blue Coat School of the Arts, the live events and the sort of a la carte educational coursework and things like that. It's all free, and we were able to just approach Kansas City schools, approach enrichment, say, hey, look, we're going to let you know the sort of technological way that you can access all this information, and we're just going to make it free forever. That's harder when you say like, hey, we're going to host a camp, because then you have to okay, how are you going to get your students to our
Right.
camp, or how are we going to
A bus
allocate
driver,
resources
and,
oh yeah,
just
exactly, bus drivers, permission slips, parents overnight, all that kind of stuff, and now we can say, okay, look, we're directing resources that come from the magic of the drum corps online into a space that makes it more accessible for students. And then we can say we care about our local community, we care about the students that are in the programs like Canton City Schools or enrichment of Stark County. And those students are students that don't normally have access to, like Genevieve said, all the wonderful programming of the drum corps. So we create a new program that puts it all there, and then we create a pathway for students to join it. And that's the kind of thing that the pandemic really allowed us to take a step back and say, okay, what kind of technology can we build? What kind of resources can we redirect? And all of a sudden, the program exists, and it's a wonderful thing. And our goal is to continue to make learning access and School of the Arts a foundational piece of the organization, rather than just sort of a pinch fix during the pandemic.
Right. And you talked a little bit about, those things accessing our local community. And I think that's also an important thing. This year, we're doing Party in the Plaza, we're going to Gervasi, we have the Akron show, of course, like our whole local series, but that's also a way for us to dive back into our like local community in like,
Absolutely.
Canton surrounding areas, which is, normally in a drum corps season, you're very focused on like going elsewhere. You're going a national tour. There's so much to cover, but allowing us to kind of refocus and offer a free event in Canton
Mhm.
is a way for us to kind of bring it back to the local community.
Yeah. We, again, taking things off the bookshelf during the pandemic, we've always talked about, and our board of directors has always said, every year, how can we be more local? And again, it's taking the magic of the drum corps and like, how can we make sure that it's here in the local community? Because our goal every year is to get the Bluecoats out there, but that means that we can't. So we re-engineered. We said, okay, stop. If we're going to engineer our own little micro tour here during the pandemic, it's going to be short. How do we engineer it to spend as much time in the local community as we can? And we're 4 days in Northeast Ohio out of just 8 days on the road. So it's almost half our time, and it's great. And Party in the Plaza is something that again, not just a pinch pandemic fix. How do we make this a long-term thing? So we've already approached DCI. We said, hey, look, we want to start our tour in Canton. We want to make sure we're here, devote some time. And so we already have it penciled in for 2022 and therefore beyond. And I think Party in the Plaza will grow to be a wonderful way for us to bring our local community in, A, access the drum corps, B, showcase other great performing arts resources and other great performing arts things in Canton, and C, throw a party, throw a celebration with our community that says, look, Bluecoats is here. We're aligned with our community. We want to be a resource for the community, both as entertainment and as education. And I think that this year will be a bit of a test for that. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and what better way or what better thing to happen for you to focus locally than a pandemic where you can't travel at all,
Right.
So,
Right.
but in all seriousness, it really did make us think that way, and especially when we were building out our schedule for the summer and our tour, when we started thinking about it, maybe this is possible. We started from a core of very hyper local ideas and then expanded,
Yeah.
and so that that kind of is where that sort of core kernel of our what ended up being our tour and performance season came from. And actually, that was kind of a benefit and a positive as well.
Yeah.
So if we start from those, we're talked about some of those bigger ideas, and you just talked about the kernels of like where we're starting with things. But I wonder, like, what's the first step? If you have this idea, you want to put on, maybe want to do a local performance. Like, what is the first kind of step in making that happen?
Well, a real key and one that we can't discount in this specific instance is our local community made a massive investment in a stage, in a place for it.
Yeah.
Canton City, built Centennial Plaza in cooperation with the Hall of Fame, and yes, it's celebrating all sorts of other things. It's a monument to the 100th anniversary of the foundation of professional football in Canton. But what I really love about their plan and what they did was they said from the outset that this was going to be something in the middle of an urban community, and then it's going to be a park that's always open. So in addition to it being a stage and a restaurant and all of those things, an event space, it's a park. And building stages and parks and things that are accessible to the community, they enrich the programming of organizations like Bluecoats and all the other nonprofits and other performing arts resources that are in Canton. So that's wonderful. Anytime a community makes an investment like that, it allows us, to go and take the next step. We couldn't build an event like this if we didn't have the space.
And I think too, building relationships, building social and political capital within your community. You're not going to you might not be able to throw this event if the first year you think of it, because you might not have the connections or the capital to be able to connect with all of the people and organizations that you need to put something like that on. But over time, as we work with our board members, add local board of director members, work with local organizations, have our local shows, continue to build those relationships, build a relationship with the newspaper and local media so that people are more aware of what your organization is doing. Those type of things, over time, that puts you in a good place that when you are ready to, start an event like this, that you have the connections that you need to make it happen.
Yeah, definitely. The newspaper just today actually ran an article about Party in the Plaza and the other local events.
Cantonrep.com.
Yes. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I feel like sometimes you see announcements of things happening and you think, okay, great, they just did this.
Yeah.
But you forget about like the probably years
Right.
of planning and like, thinking that this might happen like 10 years down the line. Let's start planting seeds now,
Yeah. Right.
That's totally true because sometimes you have these ideas, they don't work. People aren't interested, or you don't have the right connection to make it happen, or something else happens that, gets in your way. But that's okay because each time you try or work on it, you kind of learn something more about the process, and you probably meet another person that can help you along the way, or you talk to this. Mike's been experiencing this, but you talk to sponsors, and some of them say, not right now, but maybe next year. This
Yeah.
is too late. Maybe
Hmm.
over time though, you're building up a cadre of supporters, both financially and with their influence or connections that are able to help you put something like this on.
Yeah, absolutely. And to their credit, the sponsors that we do have on board this year, they've made this event possible. And I think we as an organization have learned a little bit about what types of things that sponsors then want to partner with you on.
True.
If we go to local business community partners and say, hey, we're putting on a drum corps show, that's less interesting to them because it's an audience that are specifically interested already in just coming to the Bluecoats. But the minute we said, hey, we're going to have a free event for the community, anyone can come. We'd love to show off our programming. We'd love to celebrate with our community, and we'd love to bring other organizations in to highlight them as well. All of a sudden, it was something that was so compelling, and for good reason. And so then we could say, okay, we're going to partner with you on this. You're going to help us. We're going to put on this event, and now we've built something that I think everyone in the community is invested in. And I think the future is bright. And that specifically for this event.
Well, that's a great point, kind of like know your audience, but we're looking at a different set of supporters and
Hmm.
sponsors and collaborators for an event like this than we would be for a drum corps show. A drum corps show, you're going to be sponsored usually by one of our other sponsors
Right,
for
Stanbury this year.
Stanbury uniforms, or Yamaha, an instrument company, something like that, that's interested in what that audience is and what those students are that are music educators or people who are interested or involved in music, rather than people for this event is focused on people who are local to the community that
Hmm.
just want to go to a concert or go to see some interesting live entertainment that's not specifically Bluecoats focused. So you're going to have a different set of people or organizations that are interested in that. Knowing how to figure that out and capitalize on it is part of putting on a successful event.
Well, and that's something that I love about Parting the Plaza, but also Learning Access. Um, we we're working on finding kind of a new constituency a little bit, and that's a big part about building a nonprofit that runs a drum corps versus a drum corps that's an
True.
organization. We're working on finding a constituency of people that they're not drum corps nuts. They don't know everything about the 2016 program. They don't love the pitch bend, but what they do love is a local performing arts organization that devotes educational resources and entertainment into its community.
And succeeds. We found that in 2016, especially when we won the championship, but also in the years since then when we've had a lot of media coverage. Tons of people that never have been to a drum corps
Hmm.
show then and still haven't know exactly what we are, and they're proud and glad to know that we have an organization that's successful out there and
Yes,
winning things or succeeding at things. It's sort of like watching, even if you don't watch, let's say, the Cleveland Cavaliers when they were winning championships, you might be proud to be from that city or
totally.
proud to follow the organization, even if you don't watch in person or even online. You
Right.
might read it in the paper and say, "We won." People had that exact same type of reaction to our competitive
And
success when
Hong
it was
Kong.
in Hong Kong trip, when
Hmm.
it was publicized in the newspaper, and we really noticed a positive impact from that.
Yeah.
That I think gives people a sense of community pride.
Yeah, and I think as we think about community programming, then we think about that part of our community. I always like to say, like, the Bluecoats community is a really broad group of people. It's people in Canton, Ohio, and Northeast Ohio who aren't drum corps nuts. It's also all the drum corps nuts that love the Bluecoats and have for
Yeah.
generations. It's our alumni, it's parents, it's all of those things. But when we think about new programming, when we think about new community events, we think about that group of people that are proud of a great nonprofit performing arts organization being in Canton and are proud to go or bring their kids. They want to, oh my gosh, Party of the Plaza. I'm gonna take my kids. I'm gonna go watch all this, great bands and the Bluecoats. How cool.
Well, and from a financial perspective, since I am the CFO, it's easy to count the money that you sell and from tickets or T-shirts, donations, that
Hmm.
kind of thing. But it's a little less, it's a little more obscure, but still very important to think about the, financial resources that you might gain, or other types of resources that you might gain just from, more vague impressions, I guess you
Yeah.
could say. Like what is, we're not going to get a sponsorship from a local bank if people didn't know about the Bluecoats and want to go to this event, whether or not that person ever bought a ticket. The idea that this is something that people want to see is also has an impact. It's just a little bit,
Sure.
around the corner, harder to see and find.
Well, and ultimately, we are a nonprofit organization, and so it's the mission that drives everything. And you could certainly interpret our mission as making a great drum corps, but our mission is so much more than that. Our mission is about impact on all sorts of lives and being inclusive in that impact too. And that means that, going to students that aren't going to make the drum corps and giving them a great experience or great educational resources as well. It's about going to your local community that don't love drum corps necessarily, but that would love to go to a free concert with their kids. Being inclusive in that mission delivery is one of those intangibles or non-financial things that Genevieve mentioned. It's about making sure that we're fulfilling our mission in the most broad terms that we're capable of.
Sounds a lot like, knowing your audience and making sure your messaging is going to match to them. Like you
Yeah.
talked about earlier, like you can't pitch a drum corps show to a bunch of people who don't know about drum corps. You have to pitch it in a different way
Yeah.
and kind of make that connection in a different way.
And that all goes back to what we were talking about leveraging the magic of the drum corps in ways that do reach people where they are.
And
Yeah.
hey, in some cases, certainly, maybe it does circle all the way around, and some of those people that come to Party in the Plaza maybe will buy a ticket to our
Sure.
next performance in Akron, So,
Yeah, we talk all the time about how could we grow drum corps beyond the people that are just absolute nuts for drum corps, and a part of that is increasing the access of drum corps both
Right.
for students, but also for people that, are consuming it as an entertainment product.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both so much for hopping in here today and chatting about this.
Yeah.
This has been a really great conversation, and I'm glad we can kind of share this with
Yeah,
everybody.
it's cool to zoom out and talk about it again.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's great.
Yeah.